Most Americans still think poverty looks obvious. They picture somebody standing on a street corner, holding a sign. Somebody disconnected from work, disconnected from society, visibly falling apart. But tonight, somewhere in America, a woman is brushing her teeth in the front seat of a minivan before covering the windows with towels so nobody notices she is sleeping inside. Tomorrow morning, she will wake up before sunrise, change clothes in a gas station bathroom, buy the cheapest coffee she can find, and go to work like nothing is wrong. Her coworkers may never realize she does not have a home. Her boss may never know she spent the night in a parking lot praying security would not knock on the glass. And the most uncomfortable part of this story is that she is not unusual anymore. Across the United States, millions of people are now living in a condition economists increasingly describe as hidden poverty. They have jobs. They have phones. Many even look financially normal from the outside. But behind closed doors, or sometimes behind fogged-up car windows, entire lives are balancing on the edge of collapse. The old image of poverty in America no longer matches reality. The fastest-growing financial crisis in the country is happening quietly, inside working households, among people who did exactly what they were told would protect them. Get a job. Work hard. Stay responsible. For a growing number of Americans, none of that is enough anymore. And the numbers behind this are staggering. Roughly 40% of Americans say they would struggle to cover an unexpected $400 expense without borrowing money, using credit, or selling something they own. That is not a fringe statistic. That is nearly half the country living with almost no financial margin for error at all. A dead battery, a medical copay, a missed shift at work. For millions of households, the difference between stability and disaster is now smaller than a grocery bill. What makes this crisis so difficult to see is that collapse in America rarely happens all at once anymore. It happens silently, through chains of tiny financial failures that build on each other with terrifying speed. A worker gets sick and loses a few hours of pay. The rent payment comes up short. A late fee gets added. The utility bill gets pushed back another week. The power gets shut off. Missing work becomes easier. Getting fired becomes more likely. Within a month, someone who looked completely stable can suddenly find themselves sleeping in a car wondering how their entire life unraveled so fast. And while politicians continue arguing about the economy in abstract terms, millions of Americans are living inside a reality the official numbers barely capture. Because the truth is, a huge portion of modern poverty is almost invisible. It exists in extended stay motels, overcrowded apartments, storage units, spare bedrooms, parking lots, and back seats. People disappear from the statistics long before they disappear from society. And by the time most Americans notice how serious this crisis has become, it may already be affecting someone they know. The frightening thing about financial collapse in America is how ordinary it usually begins. Not with some dramatic catastrophe. Not with reckless spending. Most of the time, it starts with something painfully normal. A tire blows out on the highway. A child gets sick. Hours are cut at work for 2 weeks. A transmission fails. Somebody slips on ice and ends up with an emergency room bill they cannot pay. In a financially secure household, these are stressful setbacks. In a household already surviving paycheck to paycheck, they can become the first crack in an entire system holding a life together. Researchers who study economic insecurity often describe modern American poverty as a cascade event. One problem triggers another, then another, until the person at the center of it is trapped reacting instead of recovering. And what makes this so dangerous is that the systems surrounding people do not slow down while they are falling. Rent is still due on the 1st. Utility shutoff notices still arrive on schedule. Credit card interest keeps compounding. Employers still enforce attendance policies even when the reason for missing work was completely outside someone's control. This is where many Americans fundamentally misunderstand poverty. From the outside, financial collapse often looks like bad decision-making. People ask why someone missed payments, why they took on debt, why they fell behind. But when researchers interview families living through these situations, the pattern looks very different. Most are not choosing between a good option and a bad option. They are choosing between multiple bad options while under extreme pressure. Pay the electric bill or buy groceries. Refill a prescription or make the car payment. Miss work to care for a child or risk losing the job entirely. Every decision carries damage somewhere else. Behavioral economists have studied what scarcity does to the human brain, and the findings are deeply unsettling. Constant financial stress narrows cognitive bandwidth. People under severe economic pressure become trapped in short-term survival thinking because the brain begins prioritizing immediate threats over long-term planning. In other words, poverty itself starts making escape harder, not because people become irresponsible, but because chronic stress changes the way human beings process risk, urgency, and decision-making. Studies from researchers at Princeton and Harvard found that persistent financial strain can reduce mental performance in ways comparable to losing a full night of sleep. That matters because modern poverty requires constant perfect decision-making just to survive, and the margin for error keeps shrinking. Over the past several decades, the cost of essentials in America has risen dramatically faster than many wages at the bottom half of the economy. Housing, healthcare, transportation, childcare, and food now consume such a large share of income that millions of households operate without any meaningful financial buffer at all. The Federal Reserve has repeatedly documented that large portions of the country are living with little or no emergency savings, which means a disruption does not stay isolated anymore. It spreads. Imagine a warehouse worker already spending over half their paycheck on rent. Their car suddenly needs a $900 repair. Without the car, they cannot reliably get to work. But fixing it requires money they do not have. So they delay the repair, miss shifts, and lose income at the exact moment expenses are increasing. The late rent fee appears next, then overdraft fees, then higher credit utilization damages their score. Within weeks, the financial system begins treating them as high risk precisely because they lacked enough money to absorb the original problem. Poverty starts generating penalties for being poor. This is one of the most overlooked realities of economic hardship in America. The poor consistently pay more for instability. Higher interest rates, more overdraft fees, more eviction penalties, more predatory lending exposure, more expensive insurance structures, more reliance on short-term debt. The less financial margin someone has, the more expensive basic survival becomes. And once somebody falls behind, climbing back out often requires resources they no longer possess. The psychological effect of this cannot be overstated. Financial insecurity creates a constant background state of fear. People begin avoiding unknown phone calls because it might be a debt collector. They stop opening mail because every envelope could contain another bill they cannot handle. Sleep deteriorates. Relationships fracture under pressure. Anxiety becomes permanent. Researchers have repeatedly linked prolonged economic insecurity to depression, chronic stress disorders, substance abuse, and declining physical health. Poverty is not only a financial condition. Over time, it becomes a biological condition too. And yet, millions of Americans living through this still go to work every day pretending everything is normal. That may be the most disturbing part of the modern poverty crisis. So much of it exists beneath the surface that entire communities are struggling silently beside one another without realizing how many people around them are barely holding on. The cashier smiling at customers may be living in a motel. The delivery driver dropping off dinner may be skipping meals themselves. The nursing assistant helping elderly patients may be sleeping in her car between shifts. America's poverty crisis does not always look like visible desperation anymore. Increasingly, it looks like exhaustion hidden behind ordinary life. Segment 3. America's invisible poor. One of the reasons this crisis keeps expanding without triggering the kind of national alarm it probably should is because so much of it remains hidden from public view. When most people hear the word homelessness, they picture tents under highways or people sleeping on sidewalks in large cities. Those images are real, but they represent only part of what housing instability in America actually looks like now. The fastest growing layer of homelessness is often completely invisible unless you know exactly where to look. Tonight, across the country, families are sleeping inside extended stay motels where weekly rates quietly drain entire paychecks. Others are rotating between relatives' couches, trying not to overstay their welcome while pretending the arrangement is temporary. Some are living out of cars parked behind retail stores, choosing locations with security cameras because it feels safer than isolated streets. Others are crammed into overcrowded apartments where 3 families share a space designed for one, because splitting rent is the only way anyone survives. Researchers call this hidden homelessness, and by definition, it is extremely difficult to measure. People living in these conditions often never appear in official statistics because technically they are not sleeping on the street or inside emergency shelters. They exist in a gray area between housed and homeless, constantly moving, constantly improvising, constantly trying to stay invisible long enough to avoid total collapse. And that invisibility changes how the country perceives the crisis itself. A mother sleeping in a minivan with her children may still manage to get them to school every morning. A construction worker living in a storage unit may still show up to the job site every day with clean clothes. A college student showering at a gym before class may never tell anyone they lost housing months ago. From the outside,